History of Society, Part 5, Session 3. This week we will begin the study of the private and public sectors, natural resources, and ownership policy. First, we will look at a quotation made by Joseph E. Stiglitz from his publication, Making Globalization Work, and he says, development is about transforming the lives of people, not just transforming economies. One of the mistakes that many politicians make in all countries is not is to not see their citizens as partners in the development process. They conduct the development process with the view that development will be done for them or that development will be done to them. These are both erroneous views, as no government can carry out development by themselves. This view has led to the phenomena in most countries of public schools, public health, public housing, public transportation, public welfare, and public enterprise. The maxim that the state should engage in providing services only when they could do so more efficiently and effectively than the private sector is observed more in the breach than in the norm. It has been tossed out for various reasons: political patronage, taking control of the commanding heights of the economy, and the reluctance of the private sector to make the necessary investments into some sectors of the economy. For whatever reason that the state has been the role of primary actor in the economies of many countries, particularly developing ones, this has led to workforces becoming totally dependent on the state, with commensurate deficiencies in innovation, productivity, and wealth production. The state has done a poor job universally in the areas of public health, public education, public transport, public housing, and public welfare. Their performance in public utilities, while not as bad, could be far better than it is today, particularly in developing countries. Public enterprise, the performances have also been dismal failures. State run petroleum companies in many of the developing countries could attest to these dismal failures. This culture of underperformance and failure also infects the private sector of these countries, as business entities here are bedeviled by low worker productivity when compared to similar entities in the slothful government bureaucracy and low levels of innovativeness. Bribery and corruption also feature here, and the high cost of goods and services which all these anomalies result in is passed on to the consumer. Businessmen take every opportunity to ferret out foreign exchange to safer havens whenever these opportunities are provided. This, as mentioned in a previous session, results in severe underinvestment in the country, with the government having to do whatever it can with limited foreign reserves. An adequately sized public sector and its appropriate role. All over the world, there is the complaint in most countries that their public sectors are too large, that the cost of providing such services is too much and increasing to unacceptable levels. Certainly, the cost of servicing pensions and other retirement costs are increasing and will become unsustainable at some point soon. In the developed world, populations are aging, and the generations to come will find it difficult to service these obligations. There is the need to rationalize the size of the public sector, considering this and other factors. First, let's discuss the true role of the public sector. The true role of the public sector is multifarious, but its primary role is to facilitate the private sector. When it does this adequately, there can be no obstacle to the level and equitable distribution of wealth produced in the community. What we have today in many countries is the displacement of the private sector by the public sector, with a consequent diminution in wealth production, innovation, effectiveness, and efficiency. The public sector and or government should limit itself to the roles of executor, legislator, regulator, and arbitrator. Its executive role includes initiating, letting, and funding projects and activities based upon the needs of the community and based on appropriate policy. Its legislative role is to deliberate and prescribe such laws for the peace and well-being of the community. Its regulative role is to develop and prescribe apt rules and regulations for the orderly conduct of the community, and its arbitrative role, through courts of law and commissions, is to interpret and pronounce upon the law such that justice is preserved in the realm. These roles are indeed a handful as it is, so that there need not be the desire to delve into other areas. As far as possible, the public sector should allow the private sector to execute all the works to be carried out in the community and should provide a level playing field for equitable distribution and fair competition between participants desiring to do these works. In those instances where monopolies are unavoidable, the state, through the appropriate commissions, should negotiate fair terms and conditions and prices with the monopolies. This limited role of the public should indeed have a limited role on the size of the public sector and would only employ those persons who are genuinely interested in public administration. The vast majority of the workforce would be employed in the private sector, engaged in employments that they are inclined towards and enjoy doing. Creation of the level playing field, a most important governmental activity, and the main thrust of these sessions, is the foundation upon which the success of all other governmental activity is based. Without this, no number of any country's goals and objectives would be afoot. Also, there's the great desire today in many countries for equality to be had between citizens, regardless of their racial or ethnic origin. Whether equality of opportunity is desirable going forward or is to be righted currently, both are only possible if the playing field is leveled. This leveling can only be done by ameliorating the market forces such that land, labor, and capital each do have each do not have preeminence over the other. This is the hidden or unknown measure, or if not hidden, the ignorant device that could best be activated using site value taxation. Site value taxation offers the developing countries, particularly, the best opportunity for creating equity. It can firstly create the right balance between the public and private sectors. It can be the mechanism that provides the level playing field amongst all citizens and business, where no one has an unfair economic advantage, which is not the case in many countries in any country today. It can provide a means for full employment in the country with the most diverse trades, professions, and skills imaginable. The state can free itself of the burden of providing all the employment that it now has and only employ those persons it needs to facilitate its four main mandates. It must be that the state wants to optimize the production and distribution of wealth in the country, the private sector unbridled. With a level playing field, the private sector, individuals, sportsmen, artists, cultural groups, and the like, have a greater chance of faring better economically than was the case previously. No longer would be the need to rely on transfers and grants from the state in addition to what has been earned to make a living. Private sector businesses can now use these prominent individuals, sportsmen, artists, cultural groups, and the like, to advertise themselves. The adoption of recreation grounds, cultural centers, and the like by businesses would also relieve the state of this expense. This may mean the management and upkeep of facilities on behalf of groups and teams that they may sponsor, who may use them in their performances. The agreement between the state and these sponsors would specify the desired standards of upkeep, the cost. This would immediately raise the level of professionalism, behavior, and performances as individuals, groups, and teams seek to maintain and enhance their sponsorships. The performances of participants would improve nationally and internationally. Local, national, and international competitions would also be funded by sponsors, again relieving the state of this expense. Sponsors would receive more than their pound of flesh, exposure, and advertising mileage, as these icons stand behind their products with their popularity. And there would be the advertising room for all sizes of sponsors, micro, small, medium, and large, as the more popular icon would attract the larger sponsor, and the smaller sponsor the less popular one. This is how the sports and cultural industries can be optimized, maximized, and made independent of the state. This is how even a small or medium sized country can compete successfully with the larger countries at international competitions and not be disadvantaged by deficiencies in resources, training, and the like that the smaller countries currently suffer. They will certainly be punching above their weights in this new system. What a stress free life the sportsman or artist will now have, not having to worry about funding or earning an income outside of their calling, and they can fully devote their time to honing and improving their skills. What this also means is that the education systems in the developing countries will have to include or have purpose built facilities deliver curricula specializing in all aspects of sport, all aspects of the arts, and all aspects of music. It means that the appropriate research must go into finding those students whose propensity it is towards sports, the arts, music, etc., and channel them towards these endeavors. No longer would there be the worry that a living could not be made from these endeavors, and no longer would be the bias in favor of academic pursuits and against sports, the arts, etc. The indirect effect of all this is that the supporting industries of the sports and cultural fraternities will also upgrade and be enhanced. The outputs of the administrators, managers, specialists, etc., would also need to be uplifted to adequately service their clients. In this way, the ripple effect of improvements and enhancements will take place throughout the communities, and this would equally apply to other areas of endeavor outside of sports and culture. Competition would enhance growth, and growth would enhance competition. Because of the enhanced competition that SBT would foster, the work ethic, the work productivity, and the work quality would improve significantly. The standards of these, which are normally lower in developing countries when compared to developed countries, would become on par when competition occurs. Let's have a break, but before that, what are your comments on all of this? Best role for government. As previously stated, the role of government should limit itself to four main functions: executor, legislator, regulator, and arbitrator. The trust should also be towards the establishing and maintaining a level playing field, as well as facilitating optimally the activities of the private sector, all within law and regulation. The number of activities that many governments worldwide engage in will either be eliminated or curtailed. Such government departments or ministries earmarked for elimination or curtailment will include those of labor, gender or youth affairs, social services, community development, and tourism. Market forces and the balance between the factors of production would place labor in such favorable circumstances that the need for the intervention of governments to ensure fairness in labor employer relations would be unnecessary. Similarly, market forces would render the need for intervention in gender and youth affairs unnecessary. Social services would only be needed for those persons who genuinely cannot fend for themselves, either through disability or infirmity. Government would be able to adequately take care of such persons. Many more persons would find and sustain gainful employment. Pensions would be funded adequately by workers as incomes and purchasing power would be far better than it is currently. Importantly, there would be no disparity in prestige with working in the public sector as against the private. Our salaries and terms and conditions would now be on par because of market forces. The public sector would also be able to attract the best and the brightest, and this can augur well for an enhanced public service. Similarly, the best technology and business processes would not be the exclusive domain of the private sector. Because public sectors will now be lean, modern technology, processes, and systems would make up any shortfall in capacities and can also increase capabilities. The increased activity in the private sector, business, will pull the public sector to provide satisfactory service. This then is the balance to be struck between the public and private sectors in a balanced economy such that SPT would provide. What have we to say on all of this? Local government. The importance of local government cannot be overstated in an SPT environment. Local government is close to the community and respond very quickly to issues raised there. The local government body can raise and dispense the appropriate funding for projects much easier under an SPT regime than with any other types. And it's certainly better than if funding must come from a central government. Local communities can also determine the level of SPT to be administered. This level will depend on the amount of funding needed for these projects. Citizens' forums would also be useful in these communities to interact with local officials to raise local issues and have them addressed more expeditiously than would otherwise be the case with the central government. These forums can also be online in addition to actual ones. The amount of SVT raised through this means should not all go to local government. Because local communities are all different and have different capacities to raise taxes, there must be a mechanism to have some of these funds transferred to poorer communities, lest there be disparate levels of wealth and upkeep throughout the country. Central government must also receive some of this funding to augment its funding to carry out its responsibilities. These responsibilities will include finance, national security, foreign affairs and trade, major arterial infrastructure such as highways, watercourses, education, justice, and legal affairs, natural resources, planning and the environment, national festivals, sports and culture, and public utilities. Local governments would have responsibilities to include local roads and drainage, local public housing, local health facilities and local health, garbage collection, local sports and culture facilities, local social welfare, and local community development. Local government officials must have the authority to carry out their responsibilities and should only be overridden by central government if their actions impinge on their responsibilities. The sharing of funding between local and central governments must be based on formulae that are vested in legislation. These formulae will be different for each local government body in accordance with historical needs of the local community. What comments do you have here? Natural resources. The developing world is characterized by the extraction and transfer of its natural resources to the developed world. The developed countries then add value to these resources by producing and manufacturing finished goods that are multiple times more valuable to the world than the imported resources. In this way, the disparity in wealth between developed and developing countries keeps widening. The solution must be that the developing world, where the resources reside, transition from being an exporter of these resources to an exporter of valued finished products. All its efforts must now be devoted to bringing this about, including fostering the educational research and marketing activities of its people towards this end, having its trade and investment activities biased towards having these developed world industries and their capabilities reside in the developing world, so that such capabilities could be established there. Only when finished products that are valued are produced and sold from the developing world will the economic fortunes there change. This will reverse the historical trend that has not only impacted economically, but also psychologically as well. There has always been an inferiority view in the developing world when comparing itself to the developed world that could only be reversed if by these means. Side value taxation would facilitate the production of these valuable finished products and services in a most efficient and effective way. This transformation will take place by two means primarily. The first means is through the enhanced capability of the workforce through becoming academically and technically proficient, as well as developing a culture of research in the pertinent areas. This admittedly will take time, even one or two generations, but even so is essential and well worth pursuing. The second approach includes the first approach and involves inviting those industries from the developed world into the areas the developing countries wishes to pursue. This may mean inviting those industries that are receiving the country's raw material imports. Under SVT, the tax regime would be more attractive and inviting to these industries, so there may be no problem getting them to relocate. What may be at issue is the level of educational and technical proficiency of the workforce in the developing country, as well as its general level of development and advancement. Over time, these will improve with a concerted effort and desire of the government and country to advance. Again, under SPT, the road will be much less difficult than it would be under current systems, with the private and public sectors thriving without state intervention or subsidy. If land, labor, and capital can be allowed to combine and produce without interference or obstacle, the results could only be the optimum production of wealth for the greatest number of citizens. This is the definition of the utilitarian economy, where everyone has a chance at a reasonable standard of living. Under such conditions, the developing country cannot but develop in quantum leaps. What the receiving country must ensure is that there is the appropriate transfer of technology and proficiency from the industries. This commitment can be made airtight by appropriate contracts and monitoring of sale, as well as providing tax incentives to arriving industries linked to the training of staff, to the technical knowledge and proficiency in the pertinent industries. Over time, the local workforce will grow in capability and will, in due course, be able to stand on its own in the desired industries. Are there any questions regarding this policy? Natural resources and ownership policy. The environmental abuses of developed countries, corporations, when they extract resources from developing countries, are well documented. In their desire to appease these corporations because of the financial rewards, the receiving countries do not apply the necessary environmental controls that would stop abuses, particularly in the mining and oil and gas industries. Fracking is the latest manifestation of this abuse. Developing countries must know that they are holding in trust any natural resource bounties that may be in their domains, not only for current citizens, but for future ones. In the previous session, the need to subscribe to environmental impact assessments with the eventual certificate of environmental clearance being granted could not be emphasized more. What was also seen as important was the need for citizens to participate fully in a process of monitoring the activities of the project throughout the duration of it, so that abuses could be exposed and stopped. These actions are not the case in most developing countries, with the result that, over time, environmental degradation. Foreign industry operators are carrying on activities that they dare not carry on in their home countries. What will also help in ensuring the good behavior of these industries is to extend part ownership of these arriving entities to local citizens. This could be done by placing on the local stock exchanges a minority share of the corporation, such that local investors can purchase same and have a stake in the industry. Some presence on its board of directors, as well as local employees occupying management and technical positions in the organization, will also help in this regard. While many multinational corporations may have local presence on their boards and in their management, very few have local ownership stake in them. This then should be the policy: stringent monitoring and regulation of the activities of the multinational corporations when extracting natural resources, and part local ownership of these corporations, often on the local stock exchange. These would go a long way in establishing trust and commitment to the local community. Another measure that would be useful would be to document the amount of extraction of natural resources. This is particularly important in the mining and oil and gas industries, to ensure that citizens can be made aware of the quantity of extraction and the revenues derived therewith. This would negate to some extent the propensity to corruption and malfeasance, which is prevalent in the developing world. The Global Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, is making significant strides in this regard, but has not received global acceptance to date. There is no substitute for robust policies on open, accountable, and responsive government. Government that has four clear and unambiguous roles, divided into central and local, also with clear roles, a private sector that is operating in a level playing field and is taxed based on taxable capacity, natural resources that are extracted based on stringent regulation, and minority ownership of multinational organizations by local citizens, and finally, the documentation of the extraction of all natural resources and the consequent revenues derived therefrom. These measures would go a long way in advancing the cause of the developing world in its quest to become more developed. Before we close for today, are there any further comments or questions? Next week, we will continue our discussion on this new subject, tax administration. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all over the world. We have in fact been sending this course all over the English speaking world with very favorable responses. To continue to make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address roadbroker2001@yahoo.com. Thank you for your kind. Visit us by going to our Facebook page on sustainable development or our YouTube channel, Balancing the Economy. We will respond to all your comments and questions. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the alert button to get notices that our latest session has been posted. All sessions are archived at our Facebook page. Please share with your family, friends, and acquaintances.